Rhode Island chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. We usually start off with a little introduction to chestnut. And probably many of you here know all these things, but if you're sort of new to chestnut, this lecture has been called many different things. Chestnut 101, also Chestnut for Dummies, but I thought that was a little harsh. And so it's everything you want to know about American chestnut, but we're afraid to ask. And then now, you know, if you get a new technological device, you can have like a quick start guide or just one card and have all the things you need to learn to get using it right away. That's what this is. I came to chestnut a long time ago when I was walking through my town and I found this new chestnut on the ground and I was so proud and I thought, oh, it's supposed to be rare. I've heard about these. These are awesome. These are amazing. Can't believe there's one tree in my town. And then I did a little more searching. I was adamant with my sister-in-law that it was edible chestnut, and then I heard stories of conkers and kids playing in England, you know, playing games with chestnuts. I thought it was also great. I thought I'd found something I could actually do that with my son. But as it turns out, of course, most of you know that this is not really chestnut. Right? This is a horse chestnut, which is what a lot of people who don't know much about chestnut think is an American chestnut, and it's a totally different family tree, totally different species. So, and I was sad. But then I actually decided I should learn a little something so I would know what a real chestnut was. So the question is, what is an American chestnut? And it's not that easy a question to answer. There aren't too many people alive who remember huge thriving chestnut trees. Maybe they remember when they started to die, but even those people are getting older now. So it isn't really that easy. Test yourself out here. Two of these are chestnuts. Only one of them is American. But the pictures aren't that great, so don't feel bad if you get them. So sometimes we have a right to be confused. Beech, sawtooth oak, which looks a lot like a chestnut to me. Chestnut oak. Siberian elm, which is a new one Rufin was talking about. Chinese chestnut and American chestnut. Of course, you know, the ones we see are kind of just little stump sprouts out in the woods hiding in the shadows, and that's what we're kind of used to by American. And they're all members of the Fagaceae family, which is the oak and beech. And all this happy little oak, beech, and chestnut are all the same overall family member. All right. So the question is, once you see one or you think you found one, how do you know it's American chestnut? And usually, it's not a bad place to start with the leaf. And even the leaves are pretty unique. You have to look at the shape, the color, the teeth, the hairs, and the real important thing is what's on the back that you can't really see unless you have a dissecting microscope, which I don't have. So generally, what we have to do is when we find some tree we think is American, we send the leaf to someone who knows, like Kenbrook or Charlotte. Look and see, and apparently there's a little pattern of crosshairs on the back, which I've only heard about but never really seen. It's like the cross-bun pattern or something. I don't have a picture of it. I keep trying to find one. And obviously, chestnut trees have a certain form and characteristic. We know how they should behave in certain environments, right? They have certain. All right, so we're interested not in the horse chestnut, but the American chestnut, which were huge trees on the left, lower left there. They're often called like the sequoias of the east. That's, you know, the huge ones that were down more in the southern part of the range. But they were an amazing tree used for wood, used for food. Just open grown, they could become huge trees like that. In the forest, they would take over the canopy. And here's the kind of natural range up to around 1900. And, you know, there are different theories about how wide the range goes, but this is not a bad map of the extended range. And it was 200 million acres, 4 billion trees. About a quarter of the whole hardwood forest was chestnut before, at least when Europeans came to this country. And they always talk about the squirrel who could hop on a chestnut tree up here in Maine and go all the way down to Georgia or Mississippi without leaving a chestnut. It was probably almost true. Just imagine the amount of food those trees created. A chestnut tree is an amazing tree. It sets up shop in one place and just creates pounds and pounds of children every year. Whether it's a drought, whether it's rainy, it's a very regularly producing tree. And imagine the critters who like to eat it, especially wild turkeys, bears, and grouse. You could go on and on and on. And of course, for the earlier settlers, the first settlers who came to the Americas, Native Americans used chestnut for canoes, and they used it for like shingles on their wigwams. They even, there's no better time to get a storable protein and fat and carbohydrate source than right in fall. So they would actually store them and keep them, and that really helped keep people alive during the winter, which is, as you know, up here, not too pleasant. And also, apparently, there were medicinal uses too for the leaves. They used to make tea out of it. And actually, if you want to try this, it actually works. Take some chestnut leaves and boil them and drink it. It actually tastes pretty good. I should have brought some. Then, of course, since the chestnut has been gone for a little while, we've kind of lost the whole chestnut lore and the chestnut culture. No one talks about going out and growing chestnutting anymore. That was a very standard thing back in the 19th century. Kids would go out, and there they are collecting the nuts in a blanket, little kids up there knocking them down. It's just, everyone sort of knew it was there, and even in the South, a lot of times people collected them and they sold them, and that's how they got a little extra money on the side, or that's how they let their cattle go out, or cows out into the forest, and feast on the nuts and then fatten them up. So it was quite an important tree. Not to mention, honestly, it's very good for building. It's a strong, very strong weight. It's lightweight and very strong. So it was good for building fence posts. Also, it's very rot resistant creosote. And they could use it for roof shakes, so they could use it for siding. So it was a pretty valuable wood, even used in furniture, clocks, some of the chairs, not the chairs you're sitting in. And I don't know too much about this, but I also know that the chestnut bark and wood was used to get the tannin out, and of course that's used to tan leather. So it's a huge industry in the South of extracting the tannin, and then they would use the wood for pulp after that. So it was a pretty important species. Used it for a lot of telephone poles, and here's Rufin on the Cape. Rufin's over here with a chestnut pole that's still in service since 1928. So that shows you they do last. They do last pretty well. And so here's the big question, right? What killed all the trees? That's the big question. Why all of a sudden around 1900 did the chestnuts start dying off? And again, you probably know that. But around 1904 in the New York Botanical Garden, people started noticing that the big chestnut trees were getting lesions, and they were dying. And everyone was trying to figure out what it was, and scientists were trying to figure out what was causing it. And it's a fungus. It's a bark fungus that was imported from Asia in the late 19th century on nursery stock. And it probably had multiple introductions. It might have come from China and Japan. And it's called, if you want the Latin name, it's Crechinectria parasitica. It's just a fungus. So you can grow it up in a petri dish if you do that kind of thing. And it produces a very nasty canker on the bark, and eventually that canker, and actually what you see, it goes almost twice as far underneath the bark too, so it's really burdening the whole tree and cutting it off so no nutrients can get up to the rest of the tree, the rest just dies off. It's quite a vicious thing, and I'm sure if you walk around the forest, you've seen this. This is one of our orchards. And, in case just to make sure you see those lesions. All right. And then, of course, why isn't chestnut just extinct? Why isn't it just gone completely? Why do we still walk around in the forest and see little tiny chestnut sprouts coming up? What's the answer to that? Because if you go out in the forest now, you'll find them, or you'll find in the forest sometimes one that's gotten to 20 or 30 feet and then died off on the left. But the process is that the blight cannot live above ground, so when it's underground, and the trees resprout, so they just keep resprouting and growing, getting the blight, dying, resprouting. So it's been a continuous process now. This has been happening for over 100 years with some trees. They just keep growing up, and yeah, sometimes we try to use the fact that the fungus can't live in soil. Sometimes we try to wrap the trees in soil above ground. It's just a lot of work. And if you really want to try to save a tree, it works for a while, but it's not very practical for a lot of trees. And most of you have heard about this. So once the blight comes in, it's within 50 years, pretty much every major chestnut tree in the United States was was killed off, and just American chestnuts appear to have no resistance to this blight, and it's very hard to contain spores and mold. There are billions of them get produced. They fly all over the place. The blight actually stays on other trees too, like shagbark hickory and oaks and chicotees and maples and sumacs, but it doesn't kill them, so it always has a home to live in. And the spores just travel, and it kills so quickly the tree has trouble adjusting, or it can't figure out what to do. It's almost too good a killer. If you're a pathogen, you don't want to be too good. You don't want to be too good a killer because then you have no host left. And people tried to make a scientific solution, but really it didn't seem to be working. Yeah, why couldn't it be stopped? We pretty much already know that. Just fungus spores are hard to stop. Is there anything else that tries to kill chestnut trees? Yeah, there are a couple other things, but there's this other thing called Phytophthora, which is a root disease, and actually kills the tree from the roots up. So it's not good when you have a fungus that works in the top and an ink disease that works on the bottom. But that's mostly in the south, but it seems to be moving north. But it appears that you can actually select certain trees do have some resistance to that. So believe it or not, that's not hopefully going to be a huge problem. And there's this weird thing called gall wasp, where the little wasp goes into like the leaf and plants its children or whatever, and they get these big bulbs, and it kind of ruins the tree. But obviously, these are our allies in this fight to keep the tree alive. We have Chinese resistance. Chinese trees are resistant to a certain extent. And there's a thing called hypovirulence, where the fungus gets a virus, and that seems to make it less powerful. And of course, they're starting to actually do genetic research on the chestnut. And of course, TACF. We've been trying to work on this for over 30 years. And I don't have to go into this too much, but early scientists tried to come up with a solution. What they do is they would make a cross. They would take like an American and a Japanese, and an American and a Chinese, and they would just do it once or twice, and then the offspring looked different, and they didn't really respond that well. So what they did was called the first cross, and then of course your kids are hybrids. They just didn't do it enough, because what we do is eventually we just take that back crossing system and go much further with it. And some might ask, why not just plant Chinese trees? But the ones that were available at the time were much more like orchard-type trees, although now there's a lot of research going on by the foundation in China that there are forest-like trees in China. We just don't have access to that material yet. But obviously, we're looking for trees like the ones on the left, not so much for orchard trees. And how come the Americans don't have any resistance? Well, this is the problem, right? America has been separated from Eurasia for a long time, and as that time happened, the Chinese and European chestnuts at least got to a little bit grow up with the blight. The American has been totally isolated from it, so really hasn't been able to develop any resistance. And it's just been isolated for many thousands of years. These are the chestnut, sort of very generalized thing of the chestnut types across the world. So there's Japanese, there's Chinese, European. Again, these are all connected. Over there in America, they're totally separate. You can't really get any resistance. All right, so the American Chestnut Foundation was founded by a bunch of people, and this man's idea, Charles Burnham, I think he was a corn geneticist, and he decided that there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to make a blight-resistant chestnut. You just have to keep back crossing to an American tree with the Chinese, so you get mostly an American-looking tree, but you still keep the Chinese resistance. And it's just like you might be studying biology and sort of Mendelian breeding. It's nothing fancy. We're not doing any kind of, well, at least our chapters aren't doing any kind of gene splicing or anything like that. And that was the theory, that if you carried it out, it would work, but it's going to take 20 or 30 years, and that's hard to found an organization when you have a 20 or 30 year dream to keep alive. And the whole back cross thing has been described in all different ways. You take a Labrador, you take a poodle, and you put them together, you get this thing called Labrador, except sometimes it looks a lot more like a Labrador, sometimes it looks a lot more like a poodle. That's what we do is, instead of just doing it once, over on the left-hand side there, we keep back crossing Americans, so we try to get more and more American genes back. So you have fewer Chinese genes, and hopefully just kind of keep resistance genes. So sometimes it's hard to describe. I've heard it described with pies and water and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, so now we're basically at the national level. We've actually gotten down to that lower stage there and starting to test out some of the trees that should be blight resistant, but that's just only been happening for a couple of years. And of course, does this mean we're done with the project? No, not at all. We're just pretty much beginning. You might want to know how the state chapters just fit into this. We have to do all this testing with the material National is making, but we're also going to make our own regional material. So it's going to take 30 to 50 years to even figure out if these trees really behave like we expect them to. And we're growing them in orchards. We don't even really know what they're going to do in the forest. And the science cabinet suggests that we should actually keep back crossing, so they're continuing that too, so we keep putting more American genes back into the product. And the cool thing about the chapters is you get the best local trees that have survived. Those genes get to go into the pool. So if you have a really nice tree in Rhode Island, that goes into our program, and then we are back crossing that. So it's actually a nice way of sort of capturing regional diversity. And of course, eventually we need a product that's going to work all throughout the range. We might have to have different regional products. No one's exactly sure. And because it's probably true that American chestnut that live down here is a little bit different from American chestnut that live way up to the edge of the range. But eventually, hopefully we'll get something that works throughout the natural range. And what I think you're doing in Rhode Island, do they have some BC tree orchards, or they all seed? I'm not sure about that. Yeah, well, I think for a long time, since mostly I've been in the organization, we've been doing these BC tree orchards to make the nuts for the seed orchards. So we've been sort of one step ahead, but now we're sort of going on to a new point of view. And of course, our goal is to get a blight-resistant tree that will work all over Rhode Island or Mass, or most places in Rhode Island or Mass. And we want to have nice, large, surviving trees. That's actually a tree that was found near the Quabbin Reservoir in Massachusetts. So we want to, and that's the pollination process, which we're not going to go into. All right. I don't know, you might hear something about this, and I'm not too strong on the concept yet, but the next step of instead of doing these BC tree orchards, are this thing called seed plots, I think. You have these seed plots where you take a lot of trees, you plant them fairly close together, and then you kind of weed them out with the blight, and you see which ones survive. And eventually these plots are next to each other, so you have like the best tree in each of the 150 plots is in this big field, and they can cross-pollinate later on. And then I think it's their children their nuts should be fairly resistant. So that's the plan. Of course, that's a ton of land, depending on how many blocks you need to put in. So, there are other people in this room who can explain this a lot better than I can. I think we even have a little sheet of paper on it. That's sort of the new stage we're at, which is a lot more complicated than our previous stage. Yeah, so we need seed orchards. We need large places where we can plant these different blocks, and we have to have like a 35, 40-year commitment to that land. We want to make sure the land will be there for a while. So that's kind of where we're at. And obviously we can't buy all that land. We need to have partners. We need to have land donated, or we need to work with other cooperators. Yes, so we need land. We need labor too, and even then we're getting to the point now where volunteer labor might not do it anymore. Even though we have a lot of very amazing people, we're getting to the point where once we have these huge seed orchards, and then this is even talking about trying to get those seeds out to the forest. We're kind of at a crossroads here. Of course we need love, right? Everyone has to have a passion for this. We have to keep explaining that the story, we're not done yet. We still need to work, we still need to test, and of course, money helps too, right? We're sort of the organization is kind of at a turning point now, because the model we've been using, I don't think is going to work for too much longer. So we're trying to figure out what to do. And this is just eventually when you get your plots, you have different trees from different parts of your state that get to cross-pollinate and make nice little nuts. And as long as the voles, moles, mice, turkeys, squirrels, moose, bear, deer, gall wasps don't get them, and they just 150 years you have a huge forest. So we're not even dealing with the big issue, which is how do you get these back into the forest. But I think that's what Leo is going to talk about later. So if you want to know how to help, get involved with the board, or just become a member, because that helps sponsor us. And you can get involved with orchards. And I know a lot of you have done planting down here in Rhode Island, so you've already been involved. Spread the word, we're working on it. We think we've got the right thing, but we want to test it out and make sure. And that's about it. So we have a website. Sorry, it was before Rhode Island was officially part of our so we not that we don't like Rhode Island, but we just called Mass Chestnut. We should change it to Mass Rhode Island Chestnut. And you can follow us on Facebook. Or you just go to the main website if you want to learn more about the American Chestnut Foundation. And that's our goal, right? To get the real trees back in the forest, just sort of naturally reproducing. I think that's it. Any questions? Questions, comments? How far? Oh, we're only 5 minutes off our agenda. Went through a lot of things quickly. There are a lot of people in this room who can take it to a much deeper level. If you want to drill down and ask more questions, that's a very general introduction. All right, I think, let's see. Our next thing is we're just going to go. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes. Yes, question. Oh, yes.
You mentioned timber trees that have they been developed in China, or have they been?
I mean like timber-like trees, just tall, straight, natural trees. They naturally occur in China.
Okay.
We've actually sent, I think, 2 expeditions to China, and we're trying to just link up with the right people to know where the trees are, because China is so populous, a lot of their forests have been taken away too.
Right.
And they've also tried to get orchard-type trees. They've tried to grow those. But apparently they have similar, quite tall, 60, 70 feet tall trees. And if we were going to use the Chinese resistance, it would be nice to use a tree that's closer to the one we have, right? Then there's less, you have to do less fooling around to get the form. Yes?
Yeah, it turns out there are some of those around. I checked with the Massachusetts foresters about a champion tree in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
They told me about a tree in Royalston,
Yeah.
which turned out to be Chinese, tall and straight. There was also one in my town, but it was cut down before I was able to get the pollen from it by a new owner of the land. So there are some around that do have the American type growth
Yeah,
habit.
and of course, the really tall Americans, sort of once we discover them, that's usually right before they're about to die. Like I believe that tree that picture was taken from on the left, that tree is since beginning to die, I think. They got nicked by a truck, even though it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's slowly been getting to the left. So it's on the Prescott Peninsula, so maybe it was a little bit isolated for a while. But generally, big trees that we find, they're going to be dead in a couple of years because we're seeing them end of their life. Yes?
Does the blight affect the horse chestnut?
I don't think so. And it doesn't sound like that was a hook, unless they have their own kind of blight.
There's a chestnut tree in Greenville,
Yeah.
where the bargain buyer newspaper used to be. It's a good side, and I have some of the lessons from that.
Look at the Chinese, I mean,
Maybe that's a
a
horse.
horse does. Yeah, I don't know, I think, since it's a different family, I didn't notice that was like one of the host trees.
It's not for chestnut blight. It is, horse chestnuts in Europe are having problems with the disease, and they're losing some very nice trees in Europe. I don't know if it's the same here or not.
Yeah, also, I've noticed just in kind of the local towns in Massachusetts, the horse chestnuts that are in the downtowns, they're beginning to get kind of old and scraggly. I don't know if they're sort of at the end of their life cycle, or they just seem to be getting cut down a lot in context. But again, we're kind of focused more on the American chestnut. And any other questions? Yes?
Is the Japanese chestnut blight resistant?
It is, yeah. It has a little bit of resistance because it was over there and just, Eurasia. It had a chance to develop. It has a kind of a smaller leaf. It's a little smaller tree, but it's a narrower leaf. Yeah. Any other questions? And a lot of this stuff's going to come up in the next few presentations. All right, if there are any more questions on that, as I said, during lunch, feel free, we'll have time to talk, and there's a lot of good feedback there. We're going to have just a little roundup of what's been going on at the national level and what we've been doing in the 2 chapters. And then we'll have our luncheon, and then after that we'll have to dance about putting them back to the forest. And then, Yvonne, which orchard are we going to go, which is the closest orchard?
It's the South Kingstown Land Trust, URI Master Gardener Orchard. And we have here the manager, and Gordon, and who's the master engineer for the orchard's solar irrigation system. So I hope you can all stick around and see that after.
So at the end of the meeting, then, if people are interested, they'll see one of these orchids.
It's a few miles up the road.
A few miles up the road.
Yeah.
So we'll end the meeting with that tour. All right. Just talk amongst yourselves for a few minutes and just gonna load this presentation. And get a snack.
His coffee's ready,
Coffee's
there's
ready.
hot water, and we have tea bags and that kind of stuff. Took a lot of work. There's a cord on the floor here too, so watch your feet, please.